is Jeremy O'Brien, co-founder and chief executive of PsiQuantum, on how businesses can start preparing for the quantum future. And the title is "Don't Bring Me Problems, Bring Me Solutions." So, Jeremy, where are you? Brilliant. Go ahead.
Thanks very much, Tom. Great. Thanks very much for the opportunity to be here. It's lovely to be here with many old friends and colleagues, and once again in person. I think this is my first in-person event in a couple of years, and I fear that the next couple of weeks is going to make up for the last couple of years with a busy schedule. So I'm Jeremy O'Brien. I'm one of 4 co-founders of PsiQuantum and the CEO, and I'm really happy to share my perspective on this topic of commercializing quantum computing, and that perspective has come about over the last 25 years. As for the first 20 years, as a professor in the university research environment, most recently at the University of Bristol here in the UK and Stanford in California, and obviously most recently, last 6 or 7 years as the CEO of PsiQuantum. And I really leapt at the opportunity to deliver a talk on this title, which was generated by our colleagues at The Economist, because I've long joked to people that I'm interested in quantum computing to really solve real problems, and not pretend to solve real problems, or really solve pretend problems, or most egregious of all, pretend to solve pretend problems, which obviously speaks to a lack of imagination. And having said that, I certainly in the academic days did plenty of small-scale proofs of principle, toy demonstrations, and things like that. And I think it's a fine line between being clear about what you're doing in those contexts. I thought in the middle of or towards the end of a long day, I would save you a bit of time and summarize the whole perspective in just one slide in the form of a alternative title here. And this is all I'm going to say. So I don't believe that NISQ is a solution to anything. I believe that you need fault tolerance, and that to achieve fault tolerance you need millions of qubits. And I believe that you really need to get started. If you're a corporation, you need to get started on the work now. And so the rest of this talk is really mostly an elaboration on this. So I think I don't really need to cover this first point. We're all here at this event because companies are looking very seriously at quantum computing. I would say the reason that they are doing that is because it's increasingly understood how profoundly transformative quantum computing will be of a multitude of businesses. And here you see some of my favorites, climate, energy, healthcare, finance. And I would say in my interactions and our interactions with customers across all of these different industries, the key word here is impossible. And what I mean by that is that I think businesses that are, getting ready in a productive way are those that have figured out that what quantum computing of the large-scale, fault-tolerant variety will do is take problems that are otherwise forever impossible and make them possible. And that creates a dynamic where there's clearly going to be a first-mover advantage, and I think also a sort of winner-takes-all type of dynamic around that. Enough said. I think I'm preaching to the converted. We all want quantum computers. The question that does need addressing and has been addressed throughout the day and over the last 5 to 10 years, I would say the answer to this question has not been forthcoming in a clear way, which is when are we going to have useful applications of this technology? And I want to give you my perspective on why I believe that that's the case. And I don't know of a better way to do it than using this great slide from our colleagues at Google that appeared shortly before John right here and colleagues at Google demonstrated quantum supremacy back in 2019. And the short version of things is that the reason that it's been hard to discern when useful applications are coming is because a lot of people have been hoping and expecting that in this blue NISQ regime, NISQ for noisy intermediate scale quantum, doesn't even need defining these days. It's such a popular term. If if a poor terminology in my view, and I'm pretty sure John Preskill probably would now agree. In any case, people have been extremely optimistic over the last 5 to 10 years that they would find something useful to do in that NISC regime. And as you see, there's a yawning gap between that NISC regime and the known to be useful, utility scale, million-plus qubit fault-tolerant quantum computing, where we know of very compelling applications. And I am not anti-NISC, to be clear. I indeed am one of the co-inventors of the variational quantum eigensolver with colleagues at Bristol and Harvard and Peter Love, who I'm not sure where he's at now. And we implemented that algorithm on a chip about 10 years ago, and it was indeed, very exciting and appealing. But here's the reason why you might be skeptical about anyone ever finding something useful to do with a NISC regime, and it's encapsulated in this cartoon that you see here on the left. So with a NISC machine, you have, let's say, for argument's sake, of order 100 qubits, and because you haven't implemented fault-tolerant error correction, you can implement maybe a dozen, maybe a few dozen, maybe a couple hundred serial logic gates before the noise swamps you. And in that error-corrected regime, that fault-tolerant regime, by contrast, you take around 100 logical error-corrected qubits that have been distilled from 1 million or so qubits, and you can implement billions of serial gate operations. So unsurprisingly, you really want to be in that regime of being able to implement billions of gates in an algorithm, and not in the regime of being able to implement hundreds of gates. Now, can I make an argument that no one will ever find anything useful in the NISC regime? Of course I cannot. It's very hard to prove the non-existence of things, and it's, as we all know, impossible to prove anything in computer science. But I think the cause for hope is diminishing. And meanwhile, I think the clarity around what we can do with fault-tolerant quantum computing is becoming clearer and clearer. I don't expect you to take my or Google's word for it, but hopefully this 150-odd page proceedings of the National Academies of Science, Engineering and Medicine will go some ways if you remain unconvinced, because they are unequivocal about it. There are no applications of NISC machines. You need 1 million qubits. And again, we may find something in between these two extremes, but so far no one has done so. I'm not in the business now today of talking about how we build a quantum computer, but I do enthuse you to realize that if you're building a NISC machine, then building longer and longer ladders is an entirely appropriate thing to do. But if you're going for the moon and building utility-scale fault-tolerant quantum computers, then a ladder will not get you there. You need a rocket ship, and I think that's emerging, the clarity around that. So then, why, if that's really that large-scale fault-tolerant machine that is yet to arrive, why is there so much activity in this space now? And I think the answer is very simple, at least in my mind, which is that access to this technology will be severely limited, and it will be limited for two distinct, but I would say related reasons. The first is that, well, there's only going to be a very small number of these systems when they're first built, and they will be oversaturated in demand, and so supply will be fundamentally limited. And then, furthermore, it's the case that for your particular use case that translates into an algorithm, that translates into code, it might not fit on those first systems, and you will need to do some work, as I'll show in a second, to optimize that, and you'll need to, through that work, secure access to the technology. I don't think I've ever previously shown a cartoon like this, and it speaks to a worrying trajectory in my career from a PhD in physics to a cartoon of some people lining up. But I may have a bright future in management consulting, and I think the the message is clear. You don't want to end up at the back of the queue. Here's a slightly more, but not overly more technical slide, which talks about some work that Mercedes-Benz did in collaboration with us on lithium-ion batteries, which you've heard a bunch about today. And indeed, I would contend that every quantum computing company and every automotive company are working on lithium-ion battery chemistry together. Not in every possible combination, of course, that would be a lot of projects, but I think this is a popular topic. And I would encourage you to look at this reference from the Mercedes work here. And the point that I really want to make, without going into any of that detail, is that you've heard from Krista already this morning about the progress that's been made in quantum algorithms, and I think Microsoft and others have done some fantastic work in actually doing the homework, as my co-founder Pete likes to say, actually going through and figuring out exactly how many gates you need to implement those algorithms, what the runtime is going to be, and so on. And you've seen a very positive, steady trajectory on that front. And here's a specific example where a naive application of a fault-tolerant algorithm has gone from taking 2 weeks, and after a lot of work from some computational chemists and some quantum computer applications engineer, has reduced to 1 day. So you can imagine that this sort of work both engages you with a fault-tolerant quantum computing company, tells you about the use case of interest, but also potentially, depending on the exact dynamics out there in the market, transforms your application from being not able to be run on a quantum computer to being able to be run on a quantum computer. Now here I'm talking about gate depth, but also the width is even more compelling of algorithms. So that's the sort of work that I think solves these access issues, and is the sort of work that I enthuse you, if you're running a business, to be getting on with. And putting my management consulting hat back on, I've got a 4-step process for what you should do now. So I think the first thing is to separate the hype from reality, to identify those use cases that are applicable to those first utility scale fault-tolerant quantum computers, and obviously the ones in particular that have the greatest impact on your business. And then you'll need to optimize those algorithms and the code associated with those use cases for sure. And in order to do that, I'm pretty sure you'll need to build up your in-house expertise, and indeed you see that across, let's say, Fortune 500 companies. An increasing number have dedicated quantum computing teams internally, and I also believe that you'll want to collaborate with fault-tolerant quantum computing companies. And then finally, you want to ensure that you've got that access, and as I say, I believe that access will flow through the sort of work that I've described before. And if you're the CEO of your organization, this is what I enthuse you to do. Figure out, are we doing something in quantum computing? And if not, I recommend you get started. And then you can dazzle your team with, is it NISQ? And you don't even need to know what that acronym stands for. Is it NISQ related? And if it is, it's my conviction that you'll need to start again in fault tolerance. And I don't have time to talk about it here, but suffice to say that the sort of optimizations that you do on NISQ algorithms are not applicable to fault-tolerant algorithms. And put simply, in NISQ algorithms, 1-qubit gates are cheap and 2-qubit gates are expensive, and in fault-tolerant algorithms, it's the other way around. Now, if I sound a little exercised about this topic of NISQ versus fault tolerance, it's because I am. And I was at an event at the White House late last year where, this NISQ fault tolerance thing was sort of the elephant in the room for the whole day. And at some point I wanted to tear my hair out and shout to people, we've just heard from, 6 giant tech companies that you need 1 million qubits to do something useful. And there's a couple guys here still telling us that they're going to do something useful with 100 or 1,000 qubits. I think the movement is happening towards this, and you can expect it to happen the same way. And like everyone else, I'd be delighted if we do find NISQ-type applications or some hybrid in between. But until such a time, I would urge you against building your business around such things. And the reason that I'm particularly passionate about it is because we know unequivocally that there are profoundly valuable, important applications of utility-scale fault-tolerant quantum computers. And we need to build these systems with great urgency and get ready to deploy them for what I believe are the most pressing challenges we face, and they are climate, energy, and healthcare in that order. So I'd love us as a community to sign up to a mission like this. I've made the mistake before of trying to get a community to sign up to anything, but I think this is a reasonable sort of manifesto. Let's get on and build fault-tolerant, utility-scale quantum computers, and let's get ready to deploy them. All right. Thanks, Tom.